Hello and welcome back to a meta guide to Balls. I'm Paul, and in this series I'm taking a look at every song on the album Balls and I'm putting it into the context of a band wanting to be dropped by their record label. The idea is that there are lyrics found on every song on the album that suggest that Sparks want to be released from their record contract in order to earn themselves the creative freedom necessary to make an album as bold as Little Beethoven. Today's episode is track number 10, which is It's Educational, which means after this there's only one more song left before we move on to a meta guide to Little Beethoven. My plan is to make a video about every Sparks song from the year 2000 onwards, all tying it into this same continuous story. So before I get started, let's just talk a little bit about today's song. It's educational. It's got a very dry subject matter, which is similar to many of the songs on this album, and I think that's done intentionally. Another thing that's worth noting is the title. There are several songs on this album, particularly on side B, where the choruses start with the word it's. It's the calm before the storm. It's the bullet train. It's irreplaceable. It's a knockoff. And now it's educational. It's almost like the band are trying to wear down the ears of the listeners. And I think this is done to create a bad impression, because this is an album that takes a few listens to reveal how good it is. Many Sparks fans don't rate this album, but I urge everybody to give it a fair chance because it's a great record. So without further ado, let's get started on today's song. Throughout this series, I've made several comparisons between the album Balls and Little Beethoven. My thinking being that these two projects were recorded together despite claims to the contrary by Ron and Russell Mael. Essentially, the record label paid for Little Beethoven but got Balls. And while the two albums sound completely different, there are lots of places where they cross paths. And the opening line to this song is one of those places because it's remarkably similar to the opening line of a song on Little Beethoven.
Hey everybody, what do you know? What are all these bands so angry about? Hey you, tell me what you know.
So that opening line is, hey everybody, what do you know? And as you can see, it's really similar to the opening line of today's song. It's educational, it's foreshadowed. The line there is, hey you, tell me what you know. Tell me everything you know. So the words are remarkably similar, even if the meaning is subtly different. And in my view, the connections run really deep because the subject of what are all these bands so angry about is something that we also find on Balls. It's about what sort of music you should be making at a particular age. They talk about having the spotlight stolen from them by these angry bands, and at the time the likes of Korn and Prodigy and Limp Bizkit were some of the biggest alternative pop bands in the world. And the song ends with a list of artists who had their greatest success in their later years, much like Sparks. That's Beethoven, Coltrane, Lady Day. And there's one really pertinent part of the song where they talk about how they should address this problem.
Hey everybody, what can we do? Crank it up just a notch or two.
This is exactly what Sparks did with the album Balls. They cranked their sound up a notch or two. They had a more aggressive production that was more in keeping with what younger electronic bands were doing at the time. Clearly, it was the wrong direction for Sparks, but I think they were perfectly aware of this. And today's track is probably the best example on the album. So let's take a listen to the first verse where you hear how aggressive this sound has now become.
Why the subjects move to a constant beat with the motion
let's take a closer look at these lyrics, because an inbuilt feature of every Sparks song, in my opinion, is that there's more than one meaning that can be derived, and more than one meaning has been engineered into these words. So on the surface, this is some kind of science experiment, and it's like a psychological experiment. It's like this guy is observing human behavior. And this reminds me of an older song from 1975. This is England.
I've just come back from England with an astounding scientific sort of news. There exist in England living creatures much the same as me and you.
On the album Balls, they can also be looking for astounding scientific sort of news, this time by posing the question why the subjects move to a constant beat. This can be observing people on the dance floor, and that of course is the audience for this music. But there's a cool double meaning here, because it can be the subject, as in the subject of a song, a theme for a song. Once more, this can be a song about songwriting. How does making this type of hard electronic music alter the subjects that Sparks are writing about? They're aiming for fairly cold themes for these songs. So would the motion change with more heat if they made them warmer songs? Would that affect the sound? Do the subjects have appetites? As in, have they got potential to grow and to blossom into something bigger? And does this occur on just one site? Well, as I've said on previous videos, I think they were making two albums at once. So what they're learning on the album Balls, can that be applied to Little Beethoven? So what I take from this is that even though Balls isn't necessarily the album that they truly wanted to make, it was a means to an end in order to get to Little Beethoven, then it's by no means wasted, because they're learning about their own craft. What they're doing with Balls is making Little Beethoven even better. And I think it's fair to say that Little Beethoven is as influenced by electronic music as it is classical music, particularly with how the songs are structured. So despite them sounding completely different, what they're doing here is really feeding into their future as a band.
The subjects seem to react to light. To the males among the came to fight. Does the tank look now? Green or clear? Does it bother them that we're here? It's educational.
So again, the subjects here can be the subjects of songs rather than the subject of an experiment. So do the subjects seem to react to light? They're aiming for a particular kind of downbeat, initially unappealing music. So if they make the music lighter, how does it affect the words, and vice versa? Then do the males among them tend to fight? I think this is a pun on the brother's surname. I'm guessing that the most frequent question that Ron and Russell Mael are asked is, do you ever disagree? Do you fall out in the studio? And then, does the blank look mask pain or fear? Well, this could be a reference to how they present themselves as an electronic band, because they pioneered the format that was taken by the likes of Erasure, Pet Shop Boys, Soft Cell, of charismatic singer and bored-looking keyboard player, and that was referenced on the album where they first did this. On the song La Dolce Vita, they include this line that references how they now present themselves. That's a song that I can't wait to delve into further, and I hope you join me when I make a meta guide to Number One in Heaven. But for now, it's worth noting that that's how Ron Mael presents himself when he's working in this genre. You don't get the wacky expressions that he used during the Island years or during the 80s. So again, with the album Balls, he's got this blank look, but what's behind it? Is it pain or fear? Well, given they're standing up to this huge record label, then it could be both. both. And the same applies with the line, does it bother them that we're here? That can be the record label reacting badly to what Sparks are producing. Or an alternative explanation could be that the songs from Bulls are affecting the songs from Little Beethoven. If both are being worked on in parallel, then could one have a detrimental effect on the other?
It's not completely clear. Is it
The first question asked in this final verse is, do they ever stop or break down? And if you look at this in musical terms, then the answer to the question is present on the song itself. This is how it starts. So there we hear the song stop, and then in the middle there's a breakdown.
Hey you, tell me everything you know. Tell me.
So we hear this song stop and we hear it break down. And that breakdown, I think, is very influential on what follows for Little Beethoven in terms of how the beats drop out and how the sounds layer on top of each other. So this song is very educational for Sparks, and they can apply their learnings to their other project. But there's the other way of looking at stop or breakdown, and that is from the human perspective, because if they were working on two projects at once, then that's a lot of work. And that's something that I addressed on the Bullet Train episode, where they talk about working faster and faster, and they say it's proficiency and it's efficiency. So do they ever stop? Well, Sparks haven't stopped working in 50 years. But then there's the question of the breakdown. Well, that's something that they have to keep at arm's length. They don't want to let this pressure get to them, and this is also referenced on Bullet Train.
If you're gonna try, never wait to do it at home. If you're gonna try, do it at home. On the bullet train, nobody cries. No one said it's right, never on the bullet train.
So to me, that line shows the human cost to these two softly spoken men who are doing this really brave act in standing up to their record company whilst recording two albums in parallel. If you're gonna cry, better wait, do it at home. It also says something about the songwriting on this album, where they seem to be avoiding emotional and romantic subjects. We don't see much of the sensitive side of Sparks, and this is referenced in More Than a Sex Machine.
Oh, what a time, that's what you said. You never asked, are you well read? You never saw a sensitive side. All that you said was right, baby, right.
I interpret this as meaning that the label never sought the sensitive side of what Sparks do. Therefore, this album doesn't include the sensitive side of Sparks. And the same applies to the intellectual side of Sparks. You never asked, are you well read? So this is an album that presents itself as being pretty dumb. And this is mirrored in It's Educational, with the line, do they not look up? As in, do they read up on the subjects that they write about? And they also don't look down. And that's because it's presenting itself as a dumb album compared to Little Beethoven, which presents itself as intellectual. So when they say it's educational, that works on several levels. It's educational for the music that they're going to make in the future, but it's also educational in terms of how they want to interact with the music industry. Following this record, they gained independence. So this song is all about the lessons that they've learned and how they're going to apply it to Sparks version 2 that we saw just 2 years later. And it ends by summing up all of these questions that have been asked during the song as although it's not exactly clear. So Sparks themselves don't have answers to this, but even so, it's still educational. And maybe that means that the questions are more interesting than the answers. So that brings us to the end of the penultimate episode of A Meta Guide to Balls. And I'd like to once again thank everybody who's watched this far and people who have commented and liked and subscribed. It's a real buzz seeing the enthusiasm around this, so I'm really, really grateful. So once again, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again when I do the final episode, which is the Angels. So thanks everybody, goodbye.